could we please play cut 1 of Mark Zuckerberg in an interview with Joe Rogan? Listen to this.
How do you guys handle things when they're a big news item that's controversial? Like there was a lot of attention on Twitter during the election because of the Hunter Biden laptop story. The New York Post.
Yeah, we have that too.
Yeah, so you guys censored that as well?
So we took a different path than Twitter. Basically the background here is the FBI, I think, basically came to us, some folks on our team, and was like, hey, just so you know, like you should be on high alert. We thought that there was a lot of Russian propaganda in the 2016 election. We have it on notice that basically there's about to be some kind of dump of that's similar to that. So just be vigilant. So our protocol is different from Twitter's. What Twitter did is they said you can't share this at all. We didn't do that. What we do is we have if something is reported to us as potentially misinformation, important misinformation, we also have this third-party fact-checking program because we don't want to be deciding what's true and false. And for I think it was 5 or 7 days when it was basically being determined whether it was false, the distribution on Facebook was decreased, but people were still allowed to share it. So you could still share it, you could still consume it.
So when you say the distribution is decreased,
it got shared.
How does that work?
It basically, the ranking in newsfeed was a little bit less. So fewer people saw it than would have otherwise. So it definitely...
By what percentage?
I don't know off the top of my head, but it's meaningful. But basically, a lot of people were still able to share it. We got a lot of complaints that was the case. Obviously this is a hyper-political issue, so depending on what side of the political spectrum, you either think we didn't censor it enough or censored it way too much. But we weren't sort of as black and white about it as Twitter. We just kind of thought, hey, look, if the FBI, which I still view as a legitimate institution in this country, it's like very professional law enforcement, if they come to us and tell us that we need to be on guard about something, then I want to take that seriously.
Did they specifically say you need to be on guard about that story?
No, I don't remember if it was that specifically, but it basically fit the pattern.
Mm-hmm. It was interesting. I listened to a good chunk of this interview last night because I wanted to get the context. I've seen this clip all over the place. First of all, it's interesting because you forget about the pressure they're getting from the other side too. Mm-hmm. A lot of times we talk about how we're all annoyed at Facebook and Twitter and all these places. The other side is putting more pressure on them about making sure they do censor this stuff. And he went through that in an interesting way.
It's interesting when you listen to him, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because that's what he was saying to me when I sat at the table. He said, Glenn, the pressure is just as heavy on the other side. I don't want to get involved in any of it.
And he really goes into that. He basically says, I don't want to. You could say he doesn't want any responsibility for this whatsoever is essentially his point. Now, whether you believe him on that is another story.
Correct.
It was interesting to hear the lead up to this because Joe Rogan, I think 5 or 6 questions, 20 minutes before this question happened, he was leading to this question. I really seemed like you could tell he wanted to get something on this.
He's turned out to be a good
smart
interviewer.
Yeah.
He's really good.
And the other thing was, I think you get from this, because it doesn't specifically say, he sort of avoids that part of it where he says, I don't know why it started. You can understand them coming and saying, hey, there could be Russian influence, there could be, and we all know that some of that stuff goes on. Hey, be vigilant. And they thought this was the part of this. Right. He's not saying necessarily the FBI came to him and said, you got to stop this Hunter Biden story. No, but he doesn't deny it either.
Yeah, and it fits, he said, at worst, or at best, he said it fits the parameters of the story they were worried about.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yes.
So, and remember, the FBI had that story a year before. Mm-hmm. And they had already, we found out yesterday, they had already told their FBI agents, do not look into it.
Yep.
We're really blessed to have that computer guy save a copy and give copies out, or that thing would have been gone. We would have never heard of it.
And I think here, if you're looking at this with a critical eye, I think you're more concerned about the FBI than you are Facebook here, which is interesting. I think we've been talking about the big tech platforms, which they're guilty of a million things. I'm not letting them off here.
Yeah.
But at least the way this story is told, My suspicion's much more about the FBI and what they were telling Facebook rather than Facebook necessarily coming in and trying to make these decisions on their own. You know, everyone talks about him as like an android in this way. He actually comes off as relatively normal in this interview.
You should sit in the same room with him. He's either an accomplished sociopathic liar or he doesn't really have control of his company. And I'm not sure which it is. He might be a sociopath. He is. You listen to him. He's very logical.
Yeah.
He's very heartfelt. You know, he'll look you in the eye and say these things, and you're like, okay, well, he does have a point on that. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I think there's a level of this where these guys want to make a bunch of money.
Yeah.
They have some sort of idea of what they want the world to be, surely. But like, they also want to make a bunch of money, and they don't want to be in constant political controversies. And they'd love for someone to take all of this off their table. Like, they'd love to not be able, like, to not have to worry about it. This is why they do the fact checker thing, right? He even says this in the interview. We do the fact checkers, like, who's looking at the fact checkers, right?
Yeah. The fact checkers are flawed.
Right? Rogan asked this. He said, why? Well, how can we tell if the fact checkers are biased? And his basic point was like, I mean, he didn't say this exactly, but his basic point was, I don't really care. I just don't want to have to make the decisions. I don't want us to be responsible for it. Like, it's just like,
well, you are when you don't know who the fact checkers are.
The same thing with the algorithms, right? Like, you can say the algorithm is making the choice, but human beings have an impact on that. But the bottom line is, I think like what he wants is no responsibility, which unfortunately for him that's not how this is going to work out. I mean, people are going to come to him on both sides and say, you need to take responsibility for your platform.